Okay, folks, I'm going to hand you off to Howard Pardee, the owner of this GT350R. Again, as I emphasize, this is an extraordinarily rare car, one of 37 factory race cars built by Shelby American back then. And Howard, please.
Thanks for everybody coming here today. I hope you have a great time. We got some great weather here. I'll start out with just a smidgen of history. As you know, Carroll Shelby was involved in racing with the Cobras. He was in '64. He almost won the World's Championship, and in 1965 he did. And he was just starting to start the Ford GT program, taking that over from Ford Motor Company because Ford had kind of botched it up and it hadn't really gone anywhere. So his plate was very full. And of course, somebody from Ford got a brilliant idea. They said, we got this new car, the Mustang, and we want to race it. So they went to the Sports Car Club of America and said, here's our new Mustang, we want to race in one of your classes. And the Sports Car Club of America said, no, it's not a sports car. End of story. So they were a little perplexed, so they called up Carroll Shelby, and they said, we want to race a Mustang, and the Sports Car Club of America won't let us. Shelby, of course, you could see dollar signs ringing someplace in his head, and said, well, let me make a few phone calls. Of course, he was a national champion racer with the Sports Car Club of America for years, and his reputation was huge. He called up his friend John Bishop, who ran the Sports Car Club of America, and says, what do I got to do in a Mustang to make it a sport car? He never put the S on the end. It's always a sport car. And John Bishop says, well, you have to modify the suspension and take out the back seat because sports cars have 2 seats. So Shelby called up Ford and says, yep, that's all we got to do, modify the suspension. They said, you got it. Well, so the object was to get these cars into sports car racing. To do it, they had to, as a production car, they had to build so many production cars, which was 100. So Shelby got a couple of people together, headed up by Ken Miles. They made a couple of prototypes. Pete Brock did a styling prototype for it. And at the Christmas break at the San Jose assembly plant of Ford Motor Company, they went in and they made 110 cars. And they were just basic rolling, they were shells. The back seat was missing, the hood was missing. They brought them all back to Los Angeles and they started converting them into 65 Shelbys. Now the regulations also say that for a production sports car, you could either modify the engine for racing or you could modify the suspension. Well, Shelby was smart enough to know that if you put a race engine in the hands of people driving on the street, the warranty is going to come up just like that. So they had basically a stock engine and they modified the suspension, so the suspension on the race models was the same as the street cars, which meant it was hard and it was rough. That's very stiffly sprung, and they had shocks on them and all that. So they started at the same time building a race car and a series of production cars. Sports Car Club of America came out to the factory at the end of December, and there were 110 cars there. They weren't all completed, but 110 cars was 110 cars, and they certified that they could race and be production the next year. The factory immediately proceeded in building a prototype race car, and they entered it in a racing track called Green Valley, Texas on Valentine's Day in 1965, and it was called the St. Valentine's Day Massacre because the car just massacred everybody in the B production class. There's a very famous photo of one of these cars in the air. There's just a little hump at this track, and when it came over, it got all 4 wheels off the ground every lap. And a Pulitzer Prize photographer took that picture, and it's very famous. Anytime you see any discussion about our models in these photos, this photo always shows up. Eventually, they started racing it, and then they started producing customer cars. They had approached some people in Nassau, the Bahamas, in 1964 at the races about ordering race cars, and this was going to be the greatest thing in the world. All it's going to cost is $59.95, and you'll be winning. You'll be a winner. So the second customer order car was this car. The first car was number 94. This is number 95, and a fellow in Mabin, North Carolina ordered it. His father had the biggest house in town and owned the bank and owned the local mattress company, and he was listed as a salesman, and he had plenty of time. He raced in Nassau, he raced Formula Juniors, and so he got the car and he immediately started racing it. It raced about 6 or 7 races from the end of May when he received it to the end of November when it went to Nassau, and he had another driver driving at Nassau, and in '66 it was entered at Sebring and it was run at VIR. So altogether it had about 8 races under the original owner, and the original owner got sick and he didn't race for 2 years. He was very young. He died in 1968 at age 38. And it took his wife 2 years to sell the car. So it was 1970 before it was sold. By that time it was obsolete compared to the new Corvettes. So top line racing was out of the picture. It just raced at local events, particularly up in Road America in Wisconsin and Brainerd, Minnesota, places in the Midwest, because that's where the owner was. The third owner did the same thing. He raced it for about a year in the same kind of tracks, and after that it was retired from racing, converted to street use. Now, converted to street use means that somebody put a set of mufflers on it, and those of you who heard me come in, I put on a set of mufflers and they're gone. I should get them replaced, but I haven't. So anyway, it has about 20 races on it. Luckily for me, the car was never really smacked up. This front apron here, which is fiberglass, which is used to duct air into the brake, the openings down here, that was tapped at one time, or it was just replaced because the openings are bigger on this one. I don't know which. Since the original owner died, I can't ask him. But some of the modifications they could make for racing were the roll bar, which isn't a cage like you'd see in a NASCAR thing now. It's just basically a simple bar with 2 braces going back. They said it was a fireproof interior. That meant they left out all the headliner, the carpets, and things like that. Of course, all those things saved weight also.
Was this car just featured on, I think I just saw a show on one of the car channels. This is an R?
Yes. Not mine, I don't think, unless somebody did it unbeknownst to me. But the engine was balanced and blueprinted, and that's the main modification. And it went to street cars about 306 horsepower, and this was 350. The transmissions are aluminum. It's got what they call the Detroit locker rear end, which is a positive. It's not a limited slip. There's nothing that slips inside, no clutches. It's just mechanically, it's either locked or unlocked. And on a street that causes, sometimes when you go around a corner, you get a big metallic clunk, somewhat akin to a sledgehammer hitting an anvil. And the rear end kind of goes out to one side, and if you've got a passenger who doesn't know about it, they, "Whoa, what's wrong?" You know, just calmly pretend like nothing ever happened. So, you notice the hood has a hole there and a scoop on the top, and basically what that was designed to do is to have air flow into the scoop, and then it was sealed. I used an air cleaner on the street, but it was sealed to a round thing that went directly in the carburetor that was supposed to get cold air directly into the engine. During testing, they found out that you had to go at least 120 miles an hour. Otherwise, air actually comes forward out of the scoop. So anyway, that's the basic premise of the car. Anybody have any questions about it?
I know the answer, but I want to ask for everybody else is, can you say why they named it the 350?
Okay.
It's always very
Shelby
interesting.
Americans, they started out in Venice, California at a small rented place. And when it became apparent they were going to make these cars, they needed a lot more area because the production on them was approximately 100 a month, and that's the start, and they wanted to ramp it up to at least 200 or 300 a month. So they were lucky. They rented 2 aircraft hangars just south of the runway at Los Angeles International Airport. The hangars are still there today. If you come in from the west over the ocean and look off to your right, there's 2 huge hangars. One of them they had for the race shop, one they had for the production shop. And they were kind of sitting there one day, and all their staff, what are we going to name this car? And Shelby's not one known for great patience. And everybody's talking about their ideas and why and what kind of image it would portray and everything, and he totally got bored. And he asked one of his people, how far is it from this shop to the other one? And the guy said, 350 feet. Call it the GT350. If it's a good car, nobody will care. If it's a bad car, they'll forget about it anyway. So that's how the name came out.
There's the museum.
That's really how it happened.
That's the production facility in Los Angeles. Those are 67 Shelbys coming down the production line. About 4 years ago, we took a tour out there. It just so happens that Japan Airlines now has one of the terminals for air freight, and the guy who manages it is a Shelby Club member. And so he offered to anybody that came to convention and wanted to come on a bus tour, which we had, we would go inside, and we'd go inside, and several Shelby employees who worked there told us about where things were, how things worked. They had the production line. You notice there's a pit underneath the car so they could change the oil pans and stuff like that. Well, that pit wasn't there when Shelby took it over. They had to go through the concrete, dig it down, fix it up. Well, it was a rental building, and when they left at the end of the 67 model year, they had to fill all that in and put new concrete down. And today you can go there and you can see the concrete for going for 300 feet or so, the whole length of the place, brand new concrete. Anybody else have anything? Okay, onward.
Do you want to sell your car?
Yes. You want to buy it?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, Gene?
Okay, Gene's here.
Okay, who do we go?
We want to go to Jeff
Car.
We'll keep them moving.
Howard, are you guys going to plan another magical tour like that?
Well, we'd have to go back to Southern
Wouldn't that be amazing?
California.
Yeah, I'm saying.
Yeah.
I read that article, and you know what's such a coincidence is months before that, I went to a few of those same places. Had I known.
He's came back to Connecticut.
Yeah, this car's been in California pretty much its whole life. I received it in March 31st of this year. I traded my Boss 429 that I had 7,000 original miles and a nice check for this car that my brother found for me, who owns Paradise Wheels in San Marcos, California. A lot of the Shelby guys would know my brother quite commonly. This is an early 66 Shelby carryover car, number 6S181. This car has some pretty nice history. Number one, it's a magazine car. Anybody after the interview can come over and more than welcome to look at my pamphlet I have here. Carol Shelby's, one of Carol Shelby's heart doctors owned this car, Dr. Gray, and I can just show this, you can kind of see, it was in a magazine September of '91, and there's been other history, nice history owners. Paul McCartney's cousin, Andrew McCartney in Malibu, owned this car for like six years. What else can I say about this car except that it was a trailer queen before I bought it, and a lot of people said you'll never drive this car, Jeff, but anything that I own I drive, so I've been driving it, putting some dirt on it, but underneath, everywhere, this car is just almost perfect. And this car was restored in 1988. It still looks fairly nice today. It has this is one of the two-seater cars. I forget how many they made, Howard, about 76?
Something like that.
76 two-seater, early 66 cars. They made 252 early carryover cars, which is a 65 body with a 66 trim, you know, windows, side scoops. It has the 65 wheels on it, 65 motor, of course, drivetrain complete. This has an optional over-the-counter 67 Shelby steering wheel on it. Oh, let's see what else this car has.
Well, Jeff, do you want to mention the design features between the 65s and 6s? Because
Well, I did say, I did, you know, like, well, you know, what'd you say, Gene?
The front suspension is different on
Well, the
your cars.
front suspension is lower, just like a 65 Shelby. Basically, all the 65 goodies are in this car. The lowered suspension, the rear end, the overrides, traction bars.
What's up, Tim?
So really, it's a 66 and 65.
Tim, what's up, pal?
But if you have any questions, or
Questions, folks? Dean. Oh, Dean's car is right over here. Dean White is, again, an original owner, just to refresh your recollections. And this is a 66 car, but it's a little bit later, right, Dean?
Yeah, this is 326 is the production number. This was a car that we purchased new. It was actually a leftover. We didn't buy it until 67. It was at Hartford in Worcester. The day I took it out to drive, the thing stalled. I couldn't start it again.
Oh,
It came out with a record for the way. We didn't buy it for another 2 or 3 months, and this had an automatic transmission in it to start life, which was the selling point, because I had a car that was standard, and my wife couldn't drive standard shift. So I said, well, you need this to be able to have a car that you can drive. So I sold her on that, and you can see I did a good job because we still have it. It's been repainted. I think around 94 I had it repainted. However, it had a lot of funny things in the back end. The paint just peeled off the back end like a year or two after I bought it. And I had somebody, you know, fix that up, but it got looking pretty sad by 1994. So and by that time the automatic transmission had quit, so I replaced that with a 4-speed transmission. This has some of the features of the 65. The suspension change that Shelby made in 65 and didn't do later in 66 was already made on this. What we call the traction bars, what they call the override traction bars that sat on top of the axle. Those were 65, but a few 66s had that. This does have those. I think that's about all the features there. As I say, we've driven this. This car has like 230,000 miles on it. Engine has been rebuilt once. As I say, the transmission acted up. Rear end, somebody went through the rear end, put new bearings in it, but it's original gears there. And I think that's about all I can say about it. It's been a family car for a while when we first had it, and later on we trailered it back from Texas. I made a tow bar to go on this thing. Towed it with a station wagon I had back from Texas to New England.
Do you want to go get it up in my truck?
Then after that, it became an occasional driver. And after I got it painted, I've hardly used it. So, I don't know. But I do drive it. And underneath is grubby, so it's it's not a show car.
One feature that's different, your car sort of shows the evolution, though. Your car had a back seat
Yeah, that's got the fold-down back seat in there. Yeah.
Tim, rifle through all those pictures. Here, rifle through them.
American Muscle Day 2020.
Cars were going through the production system, and then they started making the cars bit by bit a little more civilized so they could sell them to.
You can do so up here at the registration
I think the big changes came in later years. 67 and up, they became more of a pleasure car than they did a race car. And this thing rattles and bangs. The overriding traction bars are always dragging on the side of the body and making noises. But that's the way it is.
When we get the later cars, which there are some here, and we urge you to look at them, that's when you could get not just automatic transmissions, but you could get power steering and power brakes,
Air conditioning.
air conditioning. You know, as you go through this early 60s through 1970, where it got shut down essentially, you know, cars could have been ordered to meet the needs of people who need less noise but wanted a little bit of flash.
If you like what we do here at Larz,
Any questions
take an
on
opportunity to find
Dean's
out
car?
about the rest of our shows.
Can I take you to, we'll talk a little bit about the Hertz rental cars, which are also 66s. I have one now.
That's a collection of automobiles that belong to Larz and Isabel Anderson. They date back to 1899, and they are the oldest unrestored collection of automobiles in the world. They all came brand new home to this building. Also, because of Miss Isabel Anderson in 1939, she invited the Veteran Motor Car Club to host their
Folks,
very first
this is
meet ever.
a
right
real
here on
Hertz
the
rental
grounds
car.
of
It's a
Larz.
little bit
That
grubby
makes
still.
us the
It's
longest
kind
continuing venue
of
for
gotten
car
dirty
shows
over the
and
last
club
couple
meets
weeks.
in the nation. We've been hosting
and I
car shows
apologize
just
for
like
that.
this for over
I guess I know
68
that
years.
this
So
car
thank
doesn't
you
get
very
played
much
with
for
as much as I'd
continuing
like to. I
support
think
the museum,
the first time it was
and,
started
of
was
course,
last
allowing us to continue to
Saturday,
be
and that
part
was
of
because I
history.
needed to get
Thank you
it
so much. We hope you're
started so I
enjoying
could go to
American
Jay's
Muscle
house
Day
or to a party in
2007.
Woodstock where Jay lives. It hadn't been started since November. That's really a sin. Remember my 20 minutes each week or something like that? I'm violating my own rules. It's terrible, but I confess. This is the second to the last Hertz car which was built. There's one other car, it hasn't, at least by documents, been seen for decades. So someday maybe that car will show up, maybe not. Being a late production Hertz car, it would have had an automatic transmission and it would have had the small carburetor that goes with the automatic transmission. This car, when I restored it 20 some odd years ago, I was really looking for something that was a little bit more, I think the terms were crude and lewd, and so it really has virtually everything that's in a 65 Shelby. The front end pivots are lowered. It does not have an automatic transmission. Actually, this one has a Dan Williams top loader. If you do the lookup, Dan Williams builds the transmissions for a lot of the NASCAR teams. It's got a blow shield, and that's all part of a collection of parts that I got with the car or other stuff I stumbled into. The engine is externally, it's the correct engine for the car, but it's got quartz pistons, a crane cam, a bunch of machine work. People have asked me, geez, that doesn't really sound exactly like a Shelby. Well, I hope it doesn't. People have asked, well, how much horsepower does it make? And I don't know, but I hope it makes more than it did in 1966.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You walked into rental car agency in 66. How much money would it take to walk out with a car?
I thought they were renting them for, was it $19.95 a day plus 39 or so cents a mile? Except when I was in 66, I was in high school and knew about these cars because I worked in a garage, and one of our clients was one of the first Shelby owners in Connecticut, and a kid, teenager with college bills ahead of him, all you could do was drool. And the guy would come in every once in a while, we'd change the oil, and the big thrill was he'd say, oh geez, do you think you want to roll it over to the gas island and put some gas in it or something like that? And you know, if you're 18 years old, you're going nuts over this, but never got to own one when I could have done some serious damage to the world and myself. But you grow up, things happen, you look long enough, and you find it. This was a car that was a New York City Hertz car. It was sold into Connecticut when Hertz got rid of it, and it had a series of Connecticut owners before I picked it up. I think I'm like the 6th owner of this car, but it has a lot of the characteristics of the 65s. That's to appeal to me. Someday when I'm dead, my wife will sell it and someone will convert it back to whatever. A lot of fun. I mean, all of us drove here today. This is a lot of fun, except maybe the Mass Pike isn't quite so much fun, but or city streets, but country roads. As I said, inside, it's kind of a little bit of fun to just forget what the speed limits say and to, well, and also to recall all the details of that competition driving class you took. But it's a lot of fun. But that's pretty much it. Has it been driven? Yeah, I think I've put maybe 3,000 miles on it since it was built. So it does
at
get
minimum,
driven
it's till 4, but
other questions?
But they want me to present the stuff I brought.
Work done by Carol Shelby on these, or are these just factory?
The Hertz.
Why? What's the matter?
The Hertz cars. Well, actually, the Shelby's 65s
close,
and
but
6s
why? What's the matter, hon?
got new oil pans, headers, intake manifolds, and a carburetor change.
Okay.
But that was it. Remember what Howard was saying about the SAAC rules. The production cars had to conform fairly narrowly, so there weren't a lot of internal engine modifications unless you bought one of the R models, in which case it got a hand-built engine which was run in on a dyno, right, Howard? And those went into those cars. Those made a real 350 horsepower, but you were paying almost $5,000
Is that to the wheels?
I don't know what they were doing back then. But I think also back then, at least my recollection is the way people measured horsepower, there was a lot of liberty taken both up and down. You know, the Cobra Jet Mustangs were 335 horsepower. Yeah, right. These were 306. I don't know. But, you know, when these fell into the hands of individuals in 1965, 6, and 7, they got cams. There were changes, all kinds of changes. They didn't really stay the way they were for very long. I mean, this couple that I referred to, the guy I referred to when I worked in the garage in 1966, when they bought that car, that was the father's street car. The mom was actually an SAAC racer. She had a Lotus. And I don't think that car stayed normal, or didn't stay the way it was built for too long. But those were the 60s. It's a little bit different now. Anyway, other questions? Okay, thank you all very much. We sincerely appreciate your interest. And please, look at all the cars. There are some later cars.